In our headlines on this Monday, March 10th, here in South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol now resides at his official residence following his release from prison this past weekend after a court ruling cancels his arrest, allowing him to stand trial for insurrection without detainment. Also, on the local front, the commander of the South Korean Air Force apologizes for the accidental bombing of a residential area in Pocheon last week, injuring more than 24 people. Meanwhile, the 25% blanket U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminium imports into the American market will go into effect this coming Wednesday, that is March 12th, as announced. President Yoon Suk-yeol is back at his official residence following his release from detention this past weekend. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
President Yoon Suk-yeol, after being released from Seoul Detention Center on Saturday, stayed quiet at the presidential residence on Sunday. And it's likely that he will refrain from making public appearances for the foreseeable future, considering his impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court and the criminal trial for his alleged insurrection through his brief imposition of martial law. According to a top office official on Saturday, Yoon's health has gotten better because he had more time to sleep. For his first meal, he had kimchi jjigae with First Lady Kim Gun-hee, his chief of staff Chung Jin-seok, and other aides. Afterward, he took his dogs out for a walk. And with his release, one major change is that his communication with key figures from the ruling People Power Party is now much easier. He spoke on the phone with the PPP's floor leader Kwon Sung-dong and a senior lawmaker Na Kyung-won late Saturday after arriving at the residence, and showed his support for them amid the recent political turmoil. He can also reach out to his supporters more directly. Key PPP figures have not held back from pressuring the Constitutional Court since he was released. On the other hand, the main opposition, the Democratic Party of Korea, has criticized the prosecution for not challenging the court's decision to cancel the detention. Over the weekend, large nationwide protests both for and against President Yoon took place, with the Constitutional Court's key decision looming. Yoon's release fueled the opposition. Yoon's supporters rallied at the presidential residence while opponents gathered at Gwanghwamun Square. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, rival political parties have each taken respective legal actions in response to the president's return to his residence. Our correspondent Shin Ha-young explains.
After President Yoon Suk-yeol was released from Seoul Detention Center, the dispute between the rival parties escalated into legal complaints against investigative agencies. The ruling People Power Party has been pressuring the Constitutional Court since the release.
The Constitutional Court judges should stay firm and make the right decision based on their conscience, beliefs, and legal judgment, without being swayed by the opposition's unconstitutional claims.
The PPP on Monday filed a complaint with the Supreme Prosecutor's Office against Oh Dong-un, head of the CIO. It argued that the agency overstepped its authority by arresting the president on insurrection charges, leading to an illegal arrest through an abuse of power. Meanwhile, the main opposition Democratic Party has criticized the prosecution for not challenging the Seoul Central District Court's decision to cancel the detention. The DP and other opposition parties filed a complaint to the CIO against Prosecutor General Shim Woo-jung and called for his resignation and are even looking to pass an impeachment motion against him.
The prosecution simply repeated Yoon Suk-yeol and the PPP's claims, taking the lead in protecting Yoon, the chief conspirator of the insurrection.
In response to the opposition's pressure, Prosecutor General Shim said on Monday that his decision not to appeal the court ruling was based on due process of law.
The court clearly ruled that it violates the principles of warrants, due process, and the principle of proportionality. We felt that raising more constitutional issues by filing an immediate appeal wasn't the right thing to do.
Shim stated that his decision did not justify his resignation or impeachment, adding that he would respond accordingly if the National Assembly moves forward with impeachment. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
In other news, North Korea earlier on this Monday afternoon fired a series of missiles into the West Sea. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the launch took place from Hwangju County in Hwanghae-pukto Province and believes they included close-range ballistic missiles. This latest display of defiance came hours after the start of Freedom Shield, the annual joint military exercise between Seoul and Washington that Pyongyang maintains is a war rehearsal targeting its regime. The South Korean Air Force has formally apologized for the accidental bombing of a residential area in the city of Pocheon last week, injuring over 24 people. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has details.
The top Air Force commander issued an apology on Monday over the abnormal bombing of a civilian village in Pocheon that took place last week. While saying he takes full responsibility, the general emphasized that such an accident should never have happened.
The Air Force will deeply and sincerely look back on areas where we fell short, and with utmost determination to make changes, I will make sure such an accident never happens again by correcting incorrect practices.
The Air Force reaffirmed that a pilot made a major mistake entering the wrong target coordinates before taking off. 2 KF-16 pilots forming one unit input coordinates the day before the accident. Pilot number 1 called out the numbers and pilot number 2 entered them into the joint mission planning system. It is not known yet whose fault it is, but the latitude digits were wrongly input as 00 instead of 05.
The target coordinates were entered incorrectly, and the pilot should have checked them at least 3 times, but he didn't.
As preventive measures, the Air Force has vowed to strengthen the double-checking procedures, overhaul the reporting system, and enhance the management responsibility of superiors. Despite the accident, Seoul and Washington kicked off their annual joint exercise on Monday as planned. The 11-day drills include field training across all domains and are to reflect recent tactical changes in North Korea's military. Live fire drills have been put on pause due to the Air Force's accident. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The Korea Development Institute continues to sound the alarm over the economy amid lackluster consumption, construction and exports. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin covers the latest assessment.
The economy faces exacerbating downward risks. This is the 3rd consecutive month that the Korea Development Institute, a major state-run think tank, has made such an evaluation about South Korea's economy in its monthly report released on Monday. The rather somber tone comes amid ongoing sluggishness in the construction sector. The value of completed construction projects dropped from -7.4% in December to -27.3% in January, driven by sharp declines in new buildings and civil engineering, including infrastructure projects such as roads and bridges. And exports, which the South Korean economy heavily depends on, also grew sluggishly. While exports in February turned positive, shipments of ICT products fell on weakened semiconductor demand. By destination, exports to China dropped because of lower chip demand, while shipments to the U.S. declined amid rising trade uncertainties. Domestic demand also remained sluggish as consumer prices continue to hover in the 2% range. The country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, also rose 2% in February year-on-year. While this is a slight decline compared to the 2.2% growth seen in January, the surge in oil prices contribute to remaining in the 2% range. Last month, petroleum product prices jumped by 6.3% year-on-year, marking the 2nd consecutive month of price hikes of more than 5%. The think tank also warned in its report that escalating U.S.-related trade conflicts are deepening concerns about a global trade slowdown, which could further heighten downside risks to the economy. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The 25% U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminium imports into the American market will go into effect this coming Wednesday, as announced. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryan reports.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick confirmed that the new administration's tariff policies on steel and aluminium imports will take effect as scheduled on Wednesday. During an interview with NBC News on Sunday, Lutnick responded yes when asked whether the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium would be implemented starting March 12th. The tariffs will not only apply to Canada, Mexico and China, initial targets of US President Donald Trump's trade policies, but also to other steel and aluminium exporters, including South Korea. Lutnick's remarks come amid shifting US trade policies. Last week, Trump gave a one-month exemption for all imports covered under the free trade agreement between the US, Mexico and Canada, delaying tariffs on those goods until April 2nd. On that date, Washington is set to impose new reciprocal duties on countries around the world, further escalating trade tensions. Lutnick also clarified that tariffs on Canadian lumber and dairy products would take effect on April 2nd, contradicting Trump's earlier suggestion that they could be implemented as early as Monday or Tuesday. In a separate Fox News interview on Sunday, Trump reaffirmed that the reciprocal tariffs would proceed as planned, emphasizing that companies must manufacture in the U.S. to avoid penalties. When asked about the frequent adjustments to tariff policies, he insisted that businesses would have clarity, but warned that tariffs could increase over time. Regarding the temporary exemption for Canada and Mexico, he stated that he wanted to help U.S. automakers as well as the two neighboring countries that have significant trade relations with the U.S. Meanwhile, China has responded with a second wave of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural and livestock products effective Monday. Last Tuesday, Beijing announced that they would impose a 15% tariff hike on 29 U.S. products and a 10% increase on 711 others. The trade dispute reignited last month when the U.S. imposed an additional 10% tariff on all Chinese imports, followed by another 10% hike last week. China immediately implemented a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas from the U.S., along with a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and pickup trucks. Despite these developments, there have been no formal negotiations between the two parties to de-escalate the trade war. 문혜련, Arirang News.
In Canada, Mark Carney prepares to be sworn in as the new Prime Minister after being elected as the leader of the governing Liberal Party on Sunday. In his victory speech, the former central banker asserted that Canada would maintain its tariffs on American imports, quote, until the Americans show us respect. Meanwhile, since Carney does not currently hold a seat in the House of Commons, he is expected to call a snap general election, which could take place as early as next month. And U.S. President Donald Trump believes peace talks with Ukraine and Saudi Arabia this week will be productive. Addressing the press poll aboard Air Force One this past weekend, he also claimed Kyiv would likely seal a minerals deal with Washington amid the latest scheduled meeting. Meanwhile, a U.S. delegation led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio is poised to meet with Ukrainian authorities in Jeddah on Tuesday. Meanwhile, back on the local front, the Nat'l Assembly has launched a bipartisan parliamentary union to bolster South Korea's alliance with the U.S. In a speech to mark the occasion earlier on this Monday, Nat'l Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik shared his optimism for greater diplomatic endeavors between the two countries as some 160 lawmakers here look to engage with some 180 counterparts from the U.S. Congress. This union is the first of its kind in South Korea's National Assembly history and will serve to strengthen interactions between Korean and American lawmakers. On the agenda this year are comprehensive trade talks, also involving major firms and think tanks. South Korea is poised to host this year's APEC summit in the ancient city of Gyeongju this autumn, and a senior members meeting recently took place to jumpstart preparations. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji reports.
Gyeongju, a historic city located in the southeast of South Korea, is where this year's APEC summit will be held in late October. As the country gears up to successfully host the event, organizers held the first senior officials meeting for 2 weeks up until Sunday, aimed at setting core agenda topics for the upcoming summit. Around 2,000 officials from 21 APEC member states took part. As this year's host, South Korea laid out 2 key discussion topics it hopes to focus on. artificial intelligence, and demographic change, which includes declining birth rates and aging populations.
AI and demographics are issues that were never discussed at APEC. AI is something that can significantly impact our future, and demographics is another issue that we believe countries around the world will all have to deal with in the long term.
The executive director of APEC assessed that South Korea will be able to deliver a more holistic picture of AI's impact on economies, including innovative ways it can be used to create jobs. In an interview with Arirang News, he also spoke of how discussions on the demographic issue could help find answers to the question of how to ensure workforce productivity, despite aging populations. Regarding concerns over the current leadership challenges, he noted that preparations for the summit will not be affected by the political situation, adding that most stakeholders and experts are fairly confident that this year's meeting will be held successfully.
APEC tends to be isolated from domestic politics. So the other night we saw officials from the governor of the province, the mayor of the city, come together and support and demonstrate the city's dedication to ensuring that we have a successful event.
Ahead of the APEC economic leaders meeting, which will take place here in Gyeongju later this year, South Korea plans to host about a dozen more meetings, including the second senior officials meeting in Jeju in May, and the third such meeting in Incheon in July. 배은지, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
Meanwhile, on the silver screen in North America, director Bong Joon-ho's latest production, Mickey 17, starring Robert Pattinson, reigned the box office on its opening weekend. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Parasite director Bong Joon-ho's highly anticipated sci-fi film, Mickey 17, is off to a great start in theaters. The film, which stars Robert Pattinson, opened in first place on the North American box office charts, earning $19.1 million in its first weekend. However, Bong's latest film did not fare as well as some of his other works, receiving a grade of B in a field audience survey by market research firm CinemaScore. Mickey 17 also received a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 79% from the critics and a general audience score of 73%. The relatively low scores may also hurt its chance to earn profits. With overseas ticket sales coming in at $34.2 million, the movie's worldwide total stands at $53.3 million. The film reportedly cost $118 million to produce, not including the millions spent on marketing and promotion. However, its studio Warner Brothers is playing the long game, as it believes there is no major competition in theaters in the coming weeks. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Syria, there have been clashes between pro-government forces and those loyal to the previous regime, and more than 1,000 people, mostly civilians, have been killed. While Syria is experiencing this deadly violence, interim President Ahmed Ashara pledged on Sunday to take responsibility and address the crisis. The recent surge in violence erupted near the city of Latakia, with 4 days of intense clashes since Thursday. There have been more than 1,000 deaths, mostly Alawite civilians, as well as significant casualties among security forces and pro-Assad fighters. Reports have emerged of mass executions, revenge killings, and atrocities against civilians. Meanwhile, foreign ministers from Turkey, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq gathered in Jordan to discuss security cooperation and address the issue in Syria on Sunday. In Romania, the country's election bureau has barred far-right pro-Russia candidate Călin Georgescu from running in the upcoming presidential election, citing violations of extremism laws. On Sunday local time, Romania's Central Election Bureau announced the disqualification of Călin Georgescu from the upcoming presidential election slated for May 4th. The Bureau's decision was based on Georgescu's alleged associations with fascist organizations and endorsements from extremist groups which go against the nation's laws against extremism. Georgescu, who won the first round of last November's cancelled election amid allegations of Russian interference, called the ruling a threat to democracy. The decision can be challenged with a final ruling expected by Wednesday. This disqualification has led to violent clashes between Georgescu's supporters and riot police in Bucharest. In Australia's eastern state of Queensland and northern New South Wales, ex-tropical cyclone Alfred led to widespread destruction after making landfall on Saturday. The storm brought strong winds and heavy rain, causing damage to infrastructure and properties, with over 300,000 homes and businesses experiencing power outages. One person was confirmed dead and several were injured. Cyclones frequently occur in Queensland's tropical north, but they're uncommon in the state's temperate and densely populated region bordering New South Wales. While the economic impact is expected to be substantial, recovery efforts are likely to take several months. Finally, in Switzerland, the 55th Engadine Ski Marathon took place on Sunday local time, attracting over 12,000 participants from more than 60 nations. The 42-kilometer race stretched from Maloja to Schanf in the Engadine Valley. In the men's category, Norway's Håvard Moseby clinched victory with a time of 1 hour 34 minutes 3.9 seconds. And in the women's race, Switzerland's Nadine Fendrick secured first place with a time of 1 hour 41 minutes 3 seconds. The event not only showcased elite athletic performances, but also highlighted the region's commitment to promoting winter sports tourism. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It's still chilly in the mornings and evenings these days, but the air turns warmer during the day. The daytime temperature in Seoul rose to 14 degrees Celsius today, making more like spring. Tomorrow it will be even milder, with highs reaching up to 16 degrees in Seoul. However, in the western parts of the country, the air is stuffy every day due to the fine dust that came with spring. The ultrafine dust levels are expected to be bad in the Seoul metropolitan area and Chungcheongnam-do province tomorrow and go to normal in other areas. As the atmosphere is stagnant, air quality is not expected to start to improve until the middle of the week. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon will start off at 2 degrees and Busan at 7 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 15 to 18 degrees all over the country, a bit warmer than today. Starting with the mountainous areas of Jeju Island tonight, there is some light rain forecast on the south coast tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching.